Hi everyone, I'm Nat Rittermeyer and this is Under a Solid Sky. I'm not any kind of expert, I'm just a layman reconciling his Christian faith with the findings of biblical scholarship. Sometimes though, I'm just interested in where biblical characters ended up. Most characters walk onto the biblical stage, play their part, and then exit stage left. But their lives were more than just the part they played in scripture, and discovering those extra biblical connections is something I find fascinating. In this video, we're going to take a look at how one of the big baddies from the Gospels lived out his days in one of the world's best wine regions. Let's get started. We begin with the family tree of Herod the Great's descendants, and it's one of the more vile family trees that several New Testament characters had the misfortune of crossing paths with, and it's also a very confusing family tree. Just as a refresher, let's remind ourselves of who's who. Herod the Great is famous for his part in the Nativity story, where he killed the infants of Bethlehem. Herod Antipas had John the Baptist executed. It was Herodias who asked for John the Baptist's head as a reward for her daughter's dance. Acts 12 records how Herod Agrippa I had James executed and Peter thrown in jail. Herod Agrippa II listened to the Apostle Paul's defense in Acts 25 and 26 and supported the Romans in their destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. So these are truly some of the most miserable people in Scripture. But this video is not about them. It's about Herod Archelaus, one of the sons of Herod the Great. So what did Herod Archelaus look like? Well, there are plenty of coins minted during his reign, but none of them bear his image. We don't really know what he looked like, so we'll just use this image from the 1500s with him wearing a Nazgul-style crown. Okay, let's get into the narrative. We begin in Matthew chapter 2, toward the end of the Nativity story, just after the wise men had departed. Now, after the Magi had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." So, this Herod the Great was not a nice man, but he ruled the client state of the kingdom of Judea for the Romans until, as we read in the narrative, he died in around 4 BC. The area he ruled was the bit highlighted here in a pale yellow colour. Then, as we say, he died. His kingdom was split 4 ways between his sister, Salome, and 3 of his sons, Philip, Antipas, and Archelaus. The map goes from showing Herod the Great's kingdom of Judea looking like this, to being divided into 4 parts, or as it's known, a tetrarchy, looking like this. And the area shaded in pink is what Herod Archelaus got, just over half of his father's old territory. Archelaus became the ruler over the ethnarchy made up of the areas known as Samaria, Judea, and Idumea. Okay, so with that, let's go back to the biblical narrative. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were seeking the child's life are dead." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. Okay, so after Herod the Great died in Jericho, and pretty horribly too, Joseph had no more reason to fear him and could return to the land of Israel. Let's put that on our map. Here's Joseph and the Holy Family returning from Egypt and arriving somewhere in the land of Egypt. But that wasn't the end of Joseph's dreams. The narrative continues, "But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling Judea in the place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And after being warned in a dream, he went away to the district of Galilee, and he made his home in a town called Nazareth." And that's where the Nativity story ends. Joseph, for some reason, was scared of Herod Archelaus, so he headed north out of Archelaus' territory, ending up in Nazareth, which is located in the territory of Archelaus' brother, Herod Antipas. The obvious question now is, why was Joseph scared of Herod Archelaus? Well, he had good reason to be scared. At the beginning of his reign, Archelaus tried to be decent enough, but he quickly became unpopular for a number of reasons, and the historian Josephus lists off a few of them. The first thing in Josephus's list is that Archelaus diverted water from a village to his own fields of palm trees at Jericho, which is not a very nice thing to do, particularly if you live in that village. The next thing he did to turn the people against him was to marry his brother Alexander's wife, Glaphyra, which is not the sort of thing that goes down well at all in 1st century Judea. He also swapped out the high priest Joazar, son of Boethus, for his brother Eleazar. None of these things endeared Archelaus to his people. Eleazar didn't last long in the post, but that wasn't the point. Herod Archelaus was not making himself popular. But the worst thing Herod Archelaus did was his attempt to put down a sedition that rose up against him. The rebels were on the Temple Mount, and as Josephus writes, so Herod Archelaus sent out the whole army upon them, and sent the horsemen to prevent those that had their tents without the temple from assisting those that were within the temple, and to kill such as ran away from the footmen when they thought themselves out of danger, which horsemen slew 3,000 men, while the rest went to the neighbouring mountains. Not a nice man. Joseph was absolutely right to be fearful of him and to get out of his territory. Archelaus was not a man to be crossed. Anyway, Archelaus's unpopular rule lasted from 4 BC until 6 AD. A few pages later, Josephus concludes his tale of the events of Archelaus's reign, writing, "But in the 10th year of Archelaus's government, both his brethren and the principal men of Judea and Samaria, not being able to bear his barbarous and tyrannical usage of them, accused him before Caesar. Now Caesar, filled with rage, summoned Archelaus to Rome. Archelaus made that journey and never set foot in Idumea, Judea, or Samaria again." Josephus continues, "And when Archelaus was come to Rome, to Caesar, upon hearing what certain accusers of his had to say, and what reply he could make, Augustus both banished him and appointed Vienna, a city of Gaul, to be the place of his habitation, and took his money away from him." Now, Vienna of Gaul is modern Vienne in France, a town about an hour's drive south of Lyon. If we plot it on a map, Archelaus's journey from Rome into exile looks something like this. But hold that thought, we're going to go on a brief tangent. Just before we get to Vienne, let's just think back to Jesus' early life. Now, hopping through the Gospels and trying to line up the events between them isn't all that smart a thing to do. It's not what the Gospels are for. But if we leave Matthew behind for a second and look at Luke chapter 2, we've got Luke going to the temple with his parents when he was 12 years old. Jesus had been growing up in Nazareth, but the temple was in Jerusalem, right in the middle of Archelaus's old territory. If Joseph was scared of Archelaus back at the beginning of his reign, then the stories of Archelaus's later exploits would have only made Joseph more concerned several years into his reign. But now, with Archelaus banished to Gaul and off the scene in his old territory, there was no more reason for Joseph to fear him. He could take the child Jesus to the festival at what had previously been the Lion's Mouth, the temple in Jerusalem, without any sort of fear, going so far as feeling like he could set off home from Jerusalem without knowing exactly where the 12-year-old Jesus even was. Anyway, coming back from that tangent to Archelaus in Vienne. Modern Vienne is a beautiful town on the River Rhone. I visited it last summer. You can see the River Rhone in this photo flowing from the north on the right to the south on the left. Visitors today can visit a well-preserved Roman amphitheatre just off the bottom of this photo, but since it was built sometime between AD 40 to 50, Archelaus wouldn't have seen it until old age, if he even made it that far. One thing he would definitely have seen is the temple to Augustus, built for the worship of the very Caesar who sent him into exile. And it's nice to know that Archelaus wouldn't be allowed to forget why he was in Vienne. Every time he saw the temple, he'd be reminded that he was there because he'd been banished there by Caesar Augustus. Hopefully, he thought on his sins. But there's one aspect of life in Vienne that I hope Archelaus got to enjoy. Vienne sits at the very north end of the northern Rhone wine region, where the Shiraz grape comes from. In AD 77 or so, Pliny the Elder mentioned one of the techniques used in the region in his massive work, The Natural History. Astringent pitch, if poured upon the footstalk of the grape, will impart to it all that body and that firmness which, when placed in dolia or amphorae, it gives to wine. More recently, too, there has been discovered a vine which produces a fruit that imparts to its wine a strong flavour of pitch. It is the famous grape that confers such celebrity on the territory of Vienne. So Vienne was already on the viticultural map as early as the time of Archelaus' exile there, even if the techniques were a bit weird. Thankfully, though, as you can see from this photo, I'm pleased to report that they're not pouring pitch at the base of vines anymore. Also, just to be clear, the wine made in Vienne wasn't bilge water either. A few pages later, Pliny continues, very rarely indeed, up to the present day, has it been known for a single piece of wine to cost 1,000 sesterces. The people of Vienne, it is said, are the only ones who have set a higher price than this upon their piccata wines, the various kinds of which we have already mentioned. And this, it is thought, they only do vying with each other and influenced by a sort of national self-esteem. Now, for any fans of French wine who are watching, you'll know that things haven't changed in that regard. The wines of Northern Rhone still fetch very high prices, as I found when I visited the region last summer. Anyway, if you ever wanted a connection between Jesus and Northern Rhone's best, or if you wanted a biblical reason to visit France to consume fine wine with a biblical drinking buddy, you're welcome. Anyway, you know the drill. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.